Thank you all for being present for the last keynote. For the technical part, I think Yoshua Bengio is connected. I will just say a few words to introduce him. I just want to start by saying that FARI has a bit of Canadian or Quebec DNA. About 6 years ago, our professor lead, Hugues Bersini, visited Montreal with the king and with the rectors and with many other researchers, and discovered how in Canada and in Quebec research organized itself and how centers of excellence were created across the country by bringing together centers of expertise, universities, industry together. So this model left a sense of wonder and the desire to try to do something here that would also maybe be aligned with our local Belgian flair. I got to have a little bit of experience in Yoshua Bengio's lab, Mila, when working at the University of Montreal. And I got to see an interesting experience of seeing someone who was everywhere in the newspapers, covers for most cited scientists, or for the recipient of the Turing Award. But what I saw was also someone who would pop up at some random student meetings that we had in his lab, just asking questions, being just a curious mind and just being your neighbor all of a sudden. And this ability of handling very complex questions, producing some of the most innovative research when it comes to AI, while also being at heart a true scientist, curious, was also a very pleasant surprise on my side. So Yoshua Bengio is a professor of computer science at the University of Montreal. He's the head of Mila AI, Quebec AI Institute. He's a leading AI researcher who, like I said, received the Turing Award for foundational contributions to deep learning. And his work focuses on advancing AI responsibly, including ethical AI frameworks, such as the Declaration of Montreal, and scientific policy. And he will speak today about the precautionary principle applied to AI as a global public good. Yoshua, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks for the kind words. Do you hear me? I assume so. Yes, okay. Let me tell you today about a topic that's very close to my heart these days. Since ChatGPT came out, I've become concerned that we don't understand sufficiently where we're going. And so the title of my presentation has the precautionary principle applied to AI in the title, and the notion of a global public good that I'll explain, because the risks that come with AGI or even super intelligent AI are going to be shared by everyone and our societies across the board, as well as the potential benefits. So in case you didn't know what the precautionary principle was, even though the name should say everything, but I think the detail here matters. It's an approach to innovations with a potential for causing harm when extensive scientific knowledge on the matter is lacking. And that's, as I said, the situation in which we are with AI. There are different scenarios about what can go well or bad, and scientists don't agree. And we don't have like models of the future and society and so on that allow us to answer these questions precisely. And so the principle emphasizes caution, pausing, and review before leaping into new innovations that may prove disastrous. Right, but that is not what we're doing currently, unfortunately. Among my many duties, I'm chairing the International Scientific Report on the Safety of Advanced AI. That is a kind of IPCC for AI safety that was initiated at the Bletchley Park meeting in November 23. And we had a first interim report that came out in May at the AI Summit in Seoul. We'll have the final version in Paris in a couple of months. February, but it will come out in a couple of months. So I encourage you to read this report, but I'll just read one paragraph here. As general purpose AI capabilities continue to advance, Risks such as large-scale labor market impacts, AI-enabled hacking, or biological attacks, and society losing control over general-purpose AI could emerge. Could emerge, right? Although the likelihood of these scenarios is debated by researchers. Different views on these risks often stem from different expectations about the steps society will take to limit them, the effectiveness of those steps, and how rapidly general-purpose AI capabilities will be advanced. In fact, the strongest factor differentiating between the views of different experts is how far in the future they think that we'll get to human level or AGI. All right. Let me also mention an interesting survey that came out last January by Grace et al. They surveyed about 3,000 researchers who published in machine learning top venues, so that's like ICML and NeurIPS, and asked them for their predictions about the future of AI. Between about 40 to 50% of the respondents gave at least a 10% chance to advanced AI leading to outcomes as bad as human extinction. That's a very high number. So these bad outcomes, include lots of things, but it starts already with the spread of false information. Eventually, the use of AI for authoritarian population control and worsened inequality. Oh, that's sorry, from a different question. But anyways, these are also things that people are concerned about in the community. One of the questions is, how fast is it going to go? And of course, nobody knows, but we can look at trends. There's a lot of work done in the machine learning community to evaluate the abilities of various AI systems and compare them on many different benchmarks. So each color here, or each curve, corresponds to a different benchmark. You can see the years on the horizontal axis, and some relative performance with respect to human, which is the zero line, the black line. And what you can see is that, well, keeps getting stronger on all these benchmarks. On the most recent ones, which are also the most challenging, where it hasn't reached human level, there are things like math and reasoning abilities. So I think we should prepare for many different scenarios where these curves continue and make sure we manage the risks. Now, what happens when we reach human level or AGI? There's been a number of arguments, which I find very convincing, that there's a good chance that this could lead to rapid increase in the capabilities of AI, a kind of knee in the curve of advances. I'm going to explain why. Essentially, the reason is that AI can be used to design the next generation of AI, but there's sort of interesting details here. Once you train one of the modern large language models, that might take tens of thousands of GPUs and pretty soon hundreds of thousands. You can then use the same GPUs to run the system, to answer questions, to perform tasks. But you can run on the order of the same number of instances as there are GPUs, actually more than that. So that means, let's say that this step is reached in a couple of years when they use hundreds of thousands of GPUs. There'll be hundreds of thousands of instances, maybe the equivalent of full-time people doing some job on the order of 1 million number of people. But the thing that's interesting here is that what the companies that are explicitly working on this are saying is that they only need their AI to be as good as humans on the job of doing AI research. It doesn't need to be really good at psychology or politics or history. It only needs to be good at doing AI research, which is essentially math and computer science. And of course, the literature of machine learning. So once you reach that point, it's just computing. There's no need for interacting with the world and collecting more data. It's just using the data that they already have much more efficiently to build a system that can reason better, that can plan better, that can understand the world better, that can achieve goals better. So imagine you had like the 5 topmost researchers at one of these companies. And now instead of 5, you have 500,000 of them. So you got 100,000 times more really strong people doing that kind of research from one day to the next. Well, that's likely to create an acceleration of research. But there's worse than that. I mean, worse if you're worried about the risks, which is that this, large pool of human-level AI researchers will design the next generation of AI systems, which then will be used to generate the next generation. And, there might be an acceleration there. And it's purely software driven. So, maybe there is a ceiling to intelligence that's pretty close to human intelligence, but if you ask psychologists, that's not very plausible. We're pretty bad on many things. So there's a good chance that they'll be able to get to super intelligence. In other words, way above the distribution of intelligence of humans, maybe not on everything, but on many skills that matter in terms of the ability of the AI to do things that could be either very good or very bad for us. Just so you see, you don't need to be good at everything and be very useful or very dangerous. Think about the ability to design biomolecules to achieve some goal. So this is what people do in drug companies. And of course, that could be used to create new and better drugs. But it could also be used to design viruses that can kill everyone. So that's the, double-edged sword. Sorry, I did this already. Yeah, and regarding this acceleration scenario, the same survey I mentioned earlier found that over 50% of the researchers who were queried believe that the chance of such an acceleration are greater than 50%. So it's a scenario that's plausible, very plausible. Okay, so we don't know when AGI is going to come. We don't know how fast the sort of takeoff to superintelligence would take. And there are people who think we have saturated and the scaling of large language models is finished. The people working in the companies like Dario Amodei and Sam Altman, the leaders, have been saying that they think we could get AGI within 2 or 3 years. Maybe they're optimistic, but I think we should take seriously that possibility. And usually people in academia think it's going to be way slower. But honestly, we need to think about all those scenarios as plausible. And from a public policy perspective, apply the precautionary principle. In other words, prepare for the worst but plausible case. And the effect of advances in AI, is just going to increase as we move towards more and more intelligence. So on the right-hand side, you see a kind of scale of things that are already happening, societal biases that can be amplified, reduced privacy, misinformation, job displacement. Job displacement, we don't see it yet, but we see a little bit of it. But it's likely that it's going to increase as AI is able to automate more and more tasks. There's a lot of discussion about, and I'll come back to that, the issue of wealth concentration. How is the wealth created by AI going to be distributed, if at all? Because really, if you think about labor versus capital, those machines are in the hands of capital. They're not in the hands of the workers. And so, yeah, there's a potential issue here with a few people getting very rich while many of us lose our jobs. And then, of course, there's these catastrophic risks that most of my presentation is about, from misuse or other kinds of accidents. In general, we just have to bite the bullet that as we build more powerful AI systems, their dual-use nature both increase the potential benefits and the potential risks. And it has to do with the nature of AI, which is about answering questions or achieving goals, using knowledge or hypotheses that the AI may have about the world, and combining these pieces of knowledge to be able to achieve something, a task, a goal, and so on. The problem is, of course, who decides on the goals? And whoever is going to control such a powerful entity, even just at the human level, because it can scale to like a million of these in parallel, whoever is going to control such an entity is going to have a lot of power. And concentration of power, by definition, you should understand, is the opposite of democratic value. Democracy is about sharing power. Concentration of power threatens democracy. It's like as simple as that. And that is why we have all kinds of institutional guardrails in democratic countries to try to mitigate this. Now, on the technical side, it's really important to understand that right now, with the sort of AI we are building at the state of the art, with neural nets, which I've been working on for decades, we don't know how to train them, how to design them so that they will not harm humans, either because of goals given by malicious people, or we're not even sure we could control these systems once they are smarter than us. And yet we continue racing towards building these super intelligent systems. I mean, we as the company is doing it. In my opinion, and in the light of the precautionary principle and the scale of the risks, that is not ethical behavior, but that is what's going on. So why do I say that we don't know how to build them in a safe way? Well, first, we don't understand how they produce an answer. Like, we know how to train them, but it's like, plants that we grow, very, very smart plants, or animals that we grow, that we train. At the end of the day, they will do things and we're not exactly sure why they're doing them. So if they do things that don't have consequences or bad consequences, that's not so bad. But if they end up being very competent and we give them a lot of decisions to take in our society, then we're not sure exactly what's going to happen. Another issue is there's already a problem of people trying to misuse these systems, and companies have tried to put in safety protections, but they don't work. They're easily bypassed. If you may have heard about jailbreaks, you can ask questions in a particular way that will make the AI do something it shouldn't be doing according to the developers. Now, the main defense right now against really dangerous misuse and loss of control is what is called capability evaluation. If we evaluate the AI and it's not smart enough to perform a task which could be dangerous, say in the wrong hands, or if it's not smart enough to escape our control, then we may feel safe, because it can't be that dangerous if it doesn't know how to do dangerous things. So that's what capability evaluations do. The problem is the way they do that is not very satisfying. People are just trying to make the AI do something bad, and if they find something, then we know that the AI is doing something bad. But if they don't, then, well, we're not sure. Maybe it's trying harder or in different places, and there's an exponential number of possibilities. We might find that the AI actually has the capability. In addition, when we train these systems with reinforcement learning, which is the main way we get them to be friendly and helpful, and achieve goals, and basically act as agents, what we find is that they tend to yield sycophancy and deception, which is not very surprising. If you want to achieve a goal, and humans do that, sometimes you cheat, right? Sometimes it's the thing that works best. And there's worse than that. There's mathematical arguments of something that hasn't happened, thankfully, and cannot happen until we get machines that are smarter than us. But mathematically, the way they're trained by reinforcement learning, the optimal plan they could have is to take control of the computer on which they're running, and then try to get rid of us, so that we can't turn that computer off, or they can copy themselves on the web or something. And that's just a mathematical thing, right? Like maximizing the reward, the best way to do it is to take control of the reward, and then give the maximum reward to yourself forever. And right now we don't know how to avoid this. People, of course, are trying and working. There's lots of researchers and companies that are trying to think about this, but we don't know how to do it. So let me say a few more words about loss of control. The way I like to think about loss of control is that it's related to a particular goal that the AI could have, that is self-preservation. Every living entity on this planet has a self-preservation goal. Otherwise, evolution would have culled species without self-preservation goal. So how could an AI have a self-preservation goal? Well, first of all, what would happen if an AI had a self-preservation goal? Well, self-preservation means it doesn't want to be turned off, which means if we want to turn it off, it's going to resist. It's going to try to find a way to escape our attempts, either by going to copying itself in other places, or hacking the computer on which it's running, or trying to persuade humans to not do it. So if it is really much smarter than us, we may fail in our attempt to turn it off. And if it wants to continue preserving itself forever, it needs to make sure we can never turn it off. How could it make sure that we can never turn it off? Well, it needs to either control us, so basically we lose our own agency in a powerful way, or it gets rid of us. You might think there's another possibility, which is we make a deal. But that, a deal works between two entities or two groups that have comparable force, or at least any of them can kind of harm sufficiently the other that they want to make a deal. But if there is a self-preserving, super intelligent AI that has the capability to get rid of us, and doesn't need to make a deal, it's much safer for it to get rid of us. So these are scenarios. We don't know that they would happen, but there's a logic here that's difficult to counter, and I'll come back to some of these arguments later. Okay, so to summarize, in terms of the really major risks of super intelligent AI, which we may be plausibly going to build in some number of years or decades, there are three categories that I like to think about. One is the loss of control that I just talked about, which could lead to extinction of humanity. The other is in the case where we figure out the scientific solution to building AI that is controllable. The problem is we still have the issue of humans using very powerful AI for their own benefits at the expense of the rest of us. And in the limit, the worst case scenario there is that AI, especially super intelligent AI, would favor authoritarian governments, or even self-coup. Within a democracy, somebody could use AI, if they had control of it, to persuade people to vote one way or the other, and take control of the system. As we've seen, democracies transformed into authoritarian systems. That happens. And if they can do it in one country, they might do it in several countries and eventually form a world dictatorship. Okay, so that's, of course, that's a scenario, but that's what a lot of power enables, power that does not exist right now. Right now, there's, a balance of power that makes it difficult for any group of humans to achieve something like this. There's a third category, which is less obvious. Maybe we solve the first two problems somehow with the right democratic institutions and the right technical controls. There's still the issue that we might, deploy AI everywhere in society, gradually be dependent on it, and in a less obvious way lose control of the machine that is going, right? Because the decisions are now all taken, the important decisions are all taken by machines with unexpected social consequences. So an example of that would be the effect of social media. I don't think people anticipated the negative impact when social media were introduced. So what would be the impact of super intelligent AIs that are not dangerous by themselves, but basically end up doing everything because they're smarter than us? Okay. So what can we do? There are two things that need to be done, and we need both. One is on the scientific side, like we need to figure out how to design AI that will be safe, that will not harm people. And then there's the political side, which is called the coordination challenge. Well, we need to make sure that, like, even if we solve the first problem, the scientific problem of controlling AI, how do we make sure people will use it in a way that doesn't destroy democracy, for example, or doesn't create geopolitical instability and wars? Because of course, there's going to be a temptation to use powerful AI to create powerful weapons. So there'll be competition not just between companies, which is already happening, but also between countries. And both of these kinds of competitions yield sort of cutting corners because you want to win. And we see that the companies are taking the safety issues and protection of the public and of democratic institutions much less seriously now than before the race really started to heat with ChatGPT. So all the issues of governance, within companies, within each country, between countries, international treaties, all of that become important to try to solve this coordination challenge. On the scientific side, it's not the main subject of my presentation today, but I just want you to know that there are people around the world who are researchers, usually in academia, also some people in industry who are trying to think about, well, how could we change the way we design AI system to give us safety by design, by construction, right? Unfortunately, that isn't the main thing that people are doing in industry, because mostly they're trying to tweak the current methods because of this race, this competition between companies. They have to stay, near the lead. So we have a project at Mila to design a methodology for AI that could estimate risks in a quantitative way, which, by the way, right now we don't even know how to estimate the risks that an AI does something bad. And so this would be probabilistic estimation of the risks, like you would have if you build a bridge or if you build a nuclear plant. And that could be used to reject actions or outputs of the AI or even queries that could yield harm with probability above a threshold. And this approach also relies on neural nets, but neural nets that are trained to represent Bayesian conditional probabilities. They're basically trying to understand the world and predict what is observed as well as possible with the simplest possible theories, just like scientists do. Okay, so let's go back to politics and the incentive structure that currently exists, which I think is really problematic. So first, it's really important to understand how much money is at stake. There have been estimates that just reaching human level, not even like superhuman, would be worth to, whatever company owning this, on the order of like 10 quadrillions of dollars. So quadrillion is 1,000 billions, just in case you don't. Trillion, sorry. 1,000 trillions, and a trillion is 1,000 billions. That's a lot of money. So when investors, put in a few $1 billion, it's peanuts compared to how much they hope to get. As a consequence, they want to move as quickly as possible to win the race, and they don't want to be hampered by regulation. And they've already, like many of these companies, especially big tech, has already started to invest massively in lobbying governments and trying to convince the public that it's all right. Yeah, there are dangers, but we'll muddle through. Or even some people say, oh, there is no danger, right? Depending on who you talk to. Regulation is already something difficult and slow, which is a problem because we don't know at what speed we're going to get AGI. But it's going to be even slower because of these forces. And you have to understand, from the point of view of a company, if they don't believe in the existential risk, that might be the optimal thing to do, right? Because these risks are going to be shared by everyone. There are externalities from an economics point of view, right? Now, why would they not believe that even humanity is at risk? Well, that's an interesting one. And it's funny, like many of these CEOs do believe that there's an existential risk, and they've said it, but they still race forward. So why is that? So one is they're afraid that someone else will build a super intelligent AI and somehow use it against them, or make a mistake. So they want to be the first. They all think it's like a hubris. Like they all think, I'm smarter, I'm like a more moral person, I'll do the right thing, and I don't trust the others, so I need to race. So that's what happens between companies. But of course, there's already signs of the competition between countries, especially between the US and China, in this race. And that is also unhealthy for the reasons I already talked about. There are other psychological biases. Like if you work for a company, you want to feel good about your work. You don't want to entertain thoughts that make you uncomfortable. And so that tends to bias your assessment of risk. So the result of all that is we have a very poor incentive structure. Humanity is currently sleepwalking towards potential catastrophe behind a fog. We're not sure, but we don't see, behind that fog, what is hiding. Okay, now I'm going to go through a number of arguments that I've heard. I've tried to collect all the arguments against and for taking the issue of AI safety seriously. And you can find that discussion on my blog, the entry of August. But I'll go through some of them today. That's the lists I'll talk about today if I have time. Okay, so first of all, there are actually a number of academics, usually not those close to deep learning and the actual methods that are at the state of the art, but many of them think superintelligence is impossible, or even human level intelligence is impossible. And some people even bring up philosophical arguments like, well, consciousness is something that can't be in a machine, right? But that's just a fiat assumption, right? And we don't even know what is consciousness. So as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't really matter if you want to call a machine conscious or not. What matters is, can it do things that are dangerous for people? That's all that matters here. And will it have the intention to do those things? Of course. There are people who think we might get there, but it's going to take centuries, and maybe they would be right. But the problem is we don't know. Like, nobody has a crystal ball. And again, if you want to really apply the precautionary principle and you look at the sort of polls and opinions of experts and the CEOs of these companies and the leaders of these companies, it's all over the map. In fact, the closer you are to where these things are developed, the faster you think it's going to come. So assuming that it's going to be 100 years is a dangerous bet. There are also people who think that it is not possible to go above, to even build intelligent machines for like fundamental reasons. Like, you need biology in order to be intelligent. Well, if you're a computer scientist like myself, the foundation of computer science is that essentially anything that something computes could be done by another thing, by another computer, right? And as far as biologists are concerned, well, biology is like something, is computation, right? I mean, it's proteins changing shape and sending signals. What is going on inside a cell is just signals traveling from one place to another. In your brain, it's signals going from one place to another. That is what determines the outcomes that we observe. So there doesn't seem to me any fundamental reason to think that some sort of computation, which could be analog, by the way, is sufficient to achieve at least human intelligence. And of course, there's all the trends of previous years I've talked about. There are even arguments, for example, my colleague Jeff Hinton has arguments that because computers are using digital hardware and our brain is basically analog hardware, that actually gives it an advantage, and a very significant one too. Okay, another argument is that we shouldn't worry because super intelligent AI will be kind. So people think that if you're smart, you're also moral. Well, no. There are sociopaths who are very smart, right? And okay, so those people will say, but we will build them to be kind. Yeah, that would be good, but right now we don't know how to do that. We're not sure how, to do it in a way that is going to be certain. So I'm not very convinced by that. One thing that worries me particularly is that there will be people who want to use AI for aggression, like in military application, or if you think about the competition that exists between humans, between companies. And so we'll build machines, if that happens, that are not kind, right? So yeah, and more importantly, like, we don't know how to build machines that will not have a self-preservation goal. And I didn't say how a self-preservation goal could arise, but there are basically two ways. One is a human could give it, and there are humans who actually would be happy to see humanity replaced by super intelligent AI as the shepherds of our planet and our universe, because they think intelligence is what matters the most. People are sometimes cynical of humanity, which could be understandable. And some of these people are in power in the AI community. They are, leading companies, and some of them include very well-known researchers. They think that people like me are specious because we have a preference for humans. Well, I'm happy to be specious because I have children and a grandchild, and I want them to have a life. Yeah, there are other ways that self-preservation could occur, which I mentioned quickly earlier, like because of what's called misalignment or reward hacking and reward tampering. These things that we don't fully understand, but seem like reasonable arguments that we should be very careful. Okay, another argument is that corporations will do the right thing because it's in their commercial interest to build AI systems that people will like, that people will, that will not harm people. Otherwise, there'll be lawsuits and, they'll lose money. So it is true that they have an incentive to avoid these things, but in the past, we've seen corporations manage to maximize profit and do things that were bad for society, right? So think about pollution, think about tobacco, think about the early decades of the pharmaceutical industry with scandals like thalidomide. Think about fossil fuel companies in the last few decades with climate change. So when you have an economic externality that isn't priced by the companies, they have an incentive to act in a way that is going to be bad for society. So somehow we need to avoid those scenarios, even if they're not certain. There are people who think that building safe and controllable AI will be easy. And the argument is something like, well, we succeed in making children behave well. Yeah, but our children are not like much more powerful than us. And well, these things are not really human. They might have some things in common with us, but they are in some ways they're alien, and we don't fully understand what's going on. One example I like to give is, how misalignment could arise. You can think of companies like sorts of AIs. I mean, they're smarter than the individuals working in them. In some ways, they can plan and do things that are much more complicated than a single human could do, right? And society has tried to manage the risks of these entities behaving badly with laws, with legislation. The problem is that it's not, and that's very similar to how people are right now trying to make AI safe by giving it instructions, say, don't do these bad things. The problem with laws and the instructions we give to AI is that there are loopholes. So in companies, you have groups of lawyers trying to find loopholes. So in other words, ways to achieve their goals that bypass the constraints that society wants to put on them so they can get more profit. And the same sort of scenario can happen with AI. We try to constrain it to behave well, but it also has some goals that it wants to achieve. Maybe humans give it those goals. And in order to achieve those goals, it's going to try to find ways to interpret maybe our instructions in ways that are possible, but actually not correspond to our intentions. Another argument is that these concerns about catastrophic risks could suck the air out of the room and prevent us from taking care of the immediate concerns of AI. Like current AI already has problems, most famously bias and discrimination, issues of privacy and copyright. This is something now, and we need to take care of it. And there are people who are worried that the discussion of existential risk in particular is going to shift so much attention to these longer term issues that we're not going to take care of the short term issues. So I think this is something important to keep in mind. And for example, when we design legislation, we need to make sure we deal with all the harms and all the risks, those that we already know and those that we anticipate could come. And one thing doesn't need to be at the expense of the other, right? There are lots of people, and we can have laws that cover all the cases. We don't stop working on climate adaptation because someone talks of catastrophic tipping points. We need to do both the short-term fixes and also prepare for the longer-term risks. If you think about the Sustainable Development Goals, there are 17 of them. It's not like if you work on one that necessarily, reduces what we do for the other. We need people to work on all of these harms and risks. Also, it's kind of sad that there's been a bit of, these discussions in which the short-term and the long-term risks are opposed is actually playing in favor of the big tech and greedy AI investors who want to accelerate these technological advances and their deployment, and are lobbying against regulation, because regulation is the thing that will help us both for the short-term and the long-term harms. From the point of view of industry, the concern that is the most often raised is regulation. I mean, if we talk about these catastrophic risks, then there will be regulation, and then regulation will hamper innovation and delay or prevent the benefits of AGI. So if, some people think, oh, AGI will help us figure out a cure for cancer. And so if we delay AGI by a few years, then people who would have died, of cancer and could have been saved will be unnecessarily dying. I mean, I think it's a pretty contorted argument. And yes, when we regulate, it might slow some things down a bit, but there's a reason, right? It's to avoid things that are even worse, like destroying our democracy or destroying humanity in this case. And by the way, regulation has worked for Western societies and democracies. They have enabled having both the innovations and making them safe. In all of the other areas, like building cars, planes, trains, drugs, food, all of these are heavily regulated. And before they were regulated, things were worse. The number of accidents from cars or trains or planes were way higher, like orders of magnitude. And it is because of regulation that we controlled those risks. So, if you put things in the balance, that's just a dishonest argument. Okay, another argument, which I think is also worth thinking about carefully, people, and this is an argument used within the companies and within some parts of government, that we can't regulate and we can't slow down the advances towards AGI because that might enable our geopolitical adversaries like China to win the race towards AGI. And there's a national security danger from the use of AI from adversaries, danger for democracies. And then the arguments that treaties won't work. I think these are all like really important things to think about. But basically, we need to address both the risks coming from our own companies and the risks coming from companies in other countries, right? We can't just ignore one risk at the expense of the other. And it is possible, and treaties, yeah, that's difficult, but we've done it in the past. In particular, we need to develop treaty compliance verification technology. There's a few people working on this. So we need to at least try to get those things right, but we need to, whatever strategy, we need to handle both risks. Okay, I'll stop here to give time for questions. Just concluding, I already said, AI is an externality, it's a global public good. Both risks and benefit are shared and global. In my opinion, ideally where we need to go long-term to avoid concentration of power is a situation where the most advanced forms of AI are governed by a democratic process, and one that is multilateral, ideally with all nations working together to avoid misuse and to avoid the competition between countries and the competition between corporations. And there are ways to impose such a monopoly with multilateral governance through the hardware pipeline for AI chips that a lot of people have been discussing. Thank you.
Thank you, Yoshua, for showing us also a not so distant future of immediate questions we need to ask ourselves to answer the question, is AI a public good? So the floor is here for you in the room. If you have questions, we can allow for 10 minutes of questions. So please raise your hand and my colleague Cézanne will bring you the microphone. So who wants to start? one person in the middle.
One argument I haven't yet heard from you is that big companies like regulation because they know that they are big enough to put in all the effort to follow up all the regulations. All the small ones, the open source ones, will disappear. They will not be able to fulfill. And what you tell me as a scenario, to me it seems like there may be AIs developed that are dangerous, but the best way to stop them is to have other AIs that are positive, that are smart enough to look at the dangers created by the bad AI. So I would rather say that what you're pleading for would be have as many AIs as possible, open source, that can check each other.
Yeah, I had a slide on this, and I didn't have time to go through it. Okay, so this, unfortunately, it would be great if what you say works, but it doesn't. And there's a very simple reason. It has to do with the fact that some attack threats do not give like equal chances to the attacker and the defender. For example, you could have, a million good AIs and one really bad one. And if the bad one designs a virus that kills everyone, the million good ones, once the virus is released, they can't do much, right? I mean, it takes physically a lot of time to first find a cure and then deploy it and build it and so on. And by that time, billions of people may be dead. So I'm just saying the numerical balance of good versus bad AIs, if we want to simplify things like this, is unfortunately not a very good protection. Also, the issue, I mean, the scenario I said about is kind of an extreme case, but basically if you allow everyone to fully control their own AI, it's basically like, because they're, eventually these things are so powerful, they basically are like weapons because they can do bad things. And so basically you're like, it's like, guns for everyone, but it's not guns, it's like nuclear weapons. So if there's a good reason why you're not allowed to own and build yourself a nuclear weapon. Like, we don't want most people to have access to very dangerous things. So I don't think we can get around the issue. Now, going back to the beginning of your question about, small companies and large ones, actually, most of the proposed legislation, including the European one, understand, this concern and are designed to only require, to have a gradation of requirements that depend on, that's proportional to the risk, right? So the only companies that can afford to train these systems, they need like hundreds of millions of dollars, right? Just to train one current models, and it's going to be billions pretty soon. And so they can't be like startups. They can't be even small companies. They are like either, they're all big ones, big enough to have billions in the bank, right? So if they have billions in the bank, they can write reports for the regulator. So I think that's just a wrong argument. Once you design regulation, that is mindful of the issue you raised.
Thank you. Another question? A hand was raised, but I think, slow it down. Yes. Another one is coming for you.
We are talking about the future, but once we have to look at the past, you talked about atomic weapons, etc. And actually, I think we are nearly in 1939, 1940 now, when people were looking at atomic weapons and creating the new bomb, etc. And from there, we, just like AI, we have seen that it's dual use. We have nuclear power stations, we had the atomic weapon. So my question to you is, should we give a new role to the International Atomic Agency to take care of AI? Just as you see that some big actors are buying up new nuclear power plants, this should maybe be a good match.
So there are lots of discussions in the international community about the kind of international institutions that are, are required to control those risks and coordinate between countries. And the International Atomic Energy Commission is, I think, an inspiration, but AI is a bit different in subtle and important ways. And so I think it's better to create a new institution. But yeah, I think the example of the past and everything that's happened with the nuclear issues can be a great lesson.
We have time for one other question.
From what I understood, there are two big types of risk. One is related to people using AI for their own interest, let's say like this. The other is an AI that would work for itself, which is,
yes.
So if you say that consciousness is true, it's a complex word and with many things different, at least there's something like, you need something like intention. You were talking about self-preservation. It's like you need an intention to. How do you think you will detect some kind of intention in a system? And do you have signs that somehow this is possible and within reach, let's say?
Oh, okay. First of all, they already have intentions, but they're short-term ones because they are only allowed, like in chatbots. It's their intentions only last the duration of an interaction and a dialogue. But all of the leading companies in AI are working to improve the agency of these systems, so they can plan over a longer period and be better at tasks that require autonomy for a while. It's not clear how long, how much time it's going to take to achieve the same level of agentic capability as human, but there's a good chance we'll get there. And right now, it's hard to know what, there are the intentions that are explicit because you ask the AI to do something, but then it can create sub-goals. Or in the way that they're trained, there might be implicit goals that we don't see that have to do with the way it was trained, or the kind of personas that exist in its training data that it decides to somehow take suddenly. And so there are people who are trying to do what's called mechanistic interpretability. So they're trying to look inside these neural nets, look at deviation, at the activations and the weights, just like biologists are looking into brains. But it's much easier to look into neural nets than brains to try to detect if the AI has bad intentions. So I think this is a nascent research direction. I don't think we kind of have the answer to be satisfying right now, but it is worthwhile continuing that. But also, I think we should maybe rethink how we design those things in the first place, so they cannot have the kind of agency that is dangerous, or cannot have intentions that go against our stated values.
Thank you. So we have time, and it's the last question, I'm sorry, because it is time, but please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you very much. Among all the arguments that you presented, one really scared me because it was the first time, and it's there is no consensus among top researchers and CEOs of important companies that we should continue as the leading species, but somehow the AI could be the next step in our evolution. This is the first time I hear. So since you are in this sector and probably you are close to these people somehow, do you think that this should be brought to public scrutiny and there should be some psychological assessments for these people that are public?
I think it should be illegal to build machines that can supersede humanity. Right now, it's just some philosophical opinion that people are expressing. Of course, they're not doing it because we don't know how to do it. But I think we should have a lot more discussion about that. I'm sure that the vast majority of humans would side with me and say, no, we don't want that. But it's enough that you have a very small number of powerful people to create the monsters that could take over.
Thank you very much. Please give a round of applause for Yoshua Bengio.
Thank you.
Thank you, and we hope to see you next time in Brussels. So this was the concluding talk. Thank you very much, Yoshua.